Hey everybody, in this tutorial we're going to be taking a quick look at the different sorts of displacement maps that you can use in iClone 6. So by the end of this tutorial you're going to be able to recreate a nice cool effect like this using a single image and a single cube. Now how are we going to do that? We're going to be doing that using displacement maps and a number of other cool effects to complement that effect right here. So first of all, I'm going to explain the different types of displacement maps, and to do that I'm going to go into our project folder. In our displacement project tab rather, in the displacement folder we have this gray map versus vector project. We'll just load that up right now, and we have a bunch of different cool looking shapes over here. Let's take a look at exactly what makes them different. So you can see that this one over here on the left side, there's a number of different shapes, but they're all pretty similar in shape. They're all fairly triangular or conal actually. They extrude from the bottom and kind of get thinner as they go to the top. This one on the right, however, there's all sorts of different undercuts and crevices. We have a mushroom, we have a sort of melted snowman thingy, whatever that is, a little doodad, spirally doodad over here. So let's take a look at what makes these two groups of shapes different. And the answer to that is their displacement map. But let's go into a bit more detail first. I'm going to select this group over here, and just for your reference, if we go into scene, these are just simply two different planes. So we have a plane height map and plane vector map. So we're looking at the plane height map first. And to do that, let's go into the material settings, and we have all these different textures right here. We have the diffuse, bump, and displacement. And take a look at the displacement. It's black and white, which means it's monochromatic. And this is actually a height displacement map. A height displacement map, the qualities of a height displacement map is it's always monochromatic. It's always one single shade, or rather many shades of a single color. In general, it's black and white. Whereas the vector displacement map, if we go over here, notice that all these different maps are the same except for the displacement map. And this one's kind of a weird, looks like a kind of an old Atari game or something. Let's launch this one up and take a look at it. It doesn't really matter how we import it right now. There's a lot more detail going on here. And that's because while height displacement maps simply create new geometry by extruding it from the surface, extruding the geometry perpendicular to the surface, the vector displacement maps incorporate elements of a normal map, meaning that they use RGB values to determine the directional value of each pixel. That's how they're able to create sort of undercut shapes, whereas the the height displacement maps, they're only able to extrude directly from the surface, and we get that that conal appearance. So let's go ahead and go over back to iClone here. And for both of these, we can increase or decrease the strength. So for example, if I took this displacement map and I increase the strength, everything gets a lot bigger, but normally you'll have your preset setting that you want to keep. And you can also go over here as well. Down here, it's very important to notice that in displacement map, under the tessellation section, displacement map, it says vector displacement. And if we decrease that tessellation level, you can notice that all the shapes kind of just gonna melt down into their very basic shape, their very basic form right there. We can increase the multiplier, and that's kind of like a very extreme example of increasing the strength. Now let's take a look. If I press Control R and I go into wireframe mode, let's take a look at what happens when I decrease the tessellation level. Notice that the geometry gets a lot simpler, whereas when you increase the tessellation level, it becomes a lot more complex, and the shapes become more detailed as a result. Now there's a big difference between the way that vector displacement and height displacement maps are created. Height displacement maps, you can actually create them by yourself, just using different black and white values to extrude certain parts of your object. So for example, if I go into my content here, we have a number of different tessellation props. So if I go down to tessellation props, let's take a look at these simple ones here, these roofs, for example, or roofs for wherever you're from in the world. We'll take this roof, for example, and let's take a look at the material on this roof. You can see that we have that displacement map. It's just a black and white displacement map, a monochromatic one, very simple, like anyone can draw this really in Photoshop. Just do a couple of rectangles. If we go back into iClone, you can see that if we take that displacement map and we increase or decrease the strength, you'll notice that this is what's happening with the mesh. And so it's as simple as that, really, to create your own height displacement map. Now, on the other hand, if we go into the vector displacement map, Let's bring in another example for the vector displacement map. What I'm going to do is I'm going to start a new project here, and I'm going to go to my folder here that I have open, and I have a barbarian character saved in this folder. We're going to bring this into iClone. This barbarian folder is actually from our upcoming tessellation learning pack. You can expect that in late January, early February. And let's take a look at this guy. And in particular, let's take a look at the kind of cool looking skull thing, skull shoulder plate on his shoulder here. So that's a really kind of a badass looking skull. Let's zoom in a little bit closer and take a closer look at it. Let's go to the materials as well and take a look at the materials here. Now currently our displacement map looks like it's grayscale, but that's because we have the wrong thing selected. So I'm going to go to the material list, our picker right here, select the skull, and boom, you can see we have this displacement map that kind of looks creepy a little bit. We can load that up in Photoshop as well and see what that looks like. You can see we have some pretty cool, maybe scary looking vector displacement map here. Let's go back into iClone and take a look at the effects of that. So with vector displacement, let's zoom in a little bit closer. I'm just going to try and pay attention to the strong details here. Let's take a look first of all what happens when we delete our normal map. Now normal maps are different from vector and height displacement maps in that they don't actually change the geometry of your object. They simply create the illusion of surface texture. So they define kind of how the light reflects off of the surface by calculating different texture values to kind of create the illusion of a texture. So if I took this bump map, for example, and I deleted it, notice that a lot of the surface detail kind of goes off. We still have a lot of cool shape going on, but the surface detail is taken off. Let's press Ctrl Z and undo that and bring back our normal map. And let's go ahead then and delete the displacement map. And we'll just delete right here. If we delete this displacement map, notice particularly along the edge right here, those scales kind of have no more shape. We just have that simple kind of geometry along the edge there. Let's press Ctrl Z and undo that, and pay attention right now to that extra geometry we get, that scale effect we get when we include that vector displacement map. So that's really the difference between normal maps and displacement maps. So with vector displacement, you can create that that undercut like I mentioned earlier, whereas height displacement is simply extruding the shape perpendicular to the object's surface. So let's go ahead and press Ctrl R and take a look at the wireframe here. You can see that if we delete our displacement map, the geometry becomes a lot simpler. And if we restore that displacement map and we delete the normal map, notice there'll be absolutely no change in the geometry. So it's just basically the illusion. So let's Ctrl Z and undo that again, and Ctrl R, and we can see there we have that nice looking skull. And we can increase or decrease the displacement level as well. If I want to increase the strength here, we can kind of create a stronger scale effect. Looks pretty cool. You don't want to go to too much extreme right there, but maybe something like that would be kind of cool. And if we just rotate around it, you can see we get that nice effect along the edges of the geometry right there. Maybe a little bit further down. And we can also mess with that tessellation level as well down here. So if we wanted more detailed tessellation, you can see the effect that that has right here. If we take that all the way up and multiply it, you can get some really, well, you probably wouldn't want to do that anyways. But, that's basically the differences between height, vector, and normal maps. So let's go ahead and start our own project then real quick. And to do this, I'm going to load in a couple of cubes. And the first cube I'm going to load in is from our tessellation template folder right here. And let's just go ahead and load this cube in right here. And I'm going to load in a separate cube as well from our 3D blocks. And this is just to show you how geometry will affect your displacement. So let's go ahead and bring this one in. One of those is bigger than the other, but it doesn't really matter. The smaller one is more powerful in this case. So let's take a look at what happens when I apply some materials to these objects right here. So let's go to materials, and we'll go to our diffuse tab, or diffuse channel rather. And I'm going to load in this tribal lion JPEG. It's just a simple JPEG, and we want to go down and map this properly to our cube. So our UV settings, we can just select box. That should work just fine, and apply it. There we go. Maybe it's a little bit off on this side here. That's fine. Let's go ahead and select this one, and do the same thing. Let's load up that diffuse channel. We'll load up a tribal line, and there we go. Okay, so they look the same right now, but let's try and add a couple things onto it. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually go into my folder here, and I'm going to use an awesome little program called Bitmap to Material from Allegorithmic. And to do that, I'm going to click and drag this JPEG file. I'm going to go over to that Bitmap to Material here. Here we go. And we're going to just simply drop it onto the swatch right here and load it into the Bitmap Diffuse tweak. And that's going to load my image right there. And what Bitmap to Material does, the reason I'm using this is because it's an awesome little program that creates a number of different maps from a single diffuse image. So you can see here along the top under outputs we have normal, we have specular, we have bump, height, and all this other fun stuff, even displacement and opacity, but we won't get into those in this tutorial. Back once again, look at our normal map. Now we can tell a couple of things from our normal map here. We can see there's a bit of additional edge around here. If we wanted to adjust that, I can simply go to the shape recognition area over here, and let's kind of decrease that recognition intensity a little bit, and you can see it becomes closer to our original shape right here. And this is kind of more what we want our normal map to look like. You get that nice, faded effect along here. Now keep in mind that normal maps are normally RGB, meaning they're not monochromatic. So what we're going to do is we're going to export a few maps from Bitmap to Material here. And to do that, I simply need to go to Export as Bitmap and make sure that you only select a single frame unless you want multiple frames to be exported. So I'm just going to go from 0 to 0. And we don't need most of these maps. We can just take a lot of them out. We only want the height map, which is our, it's going to be our monochromatic height displacement map. That's going to add a bit more detail for us. We want our normal map to add those surface details. We don't need the opacity. We'll just add the specular as well to kind of create a nice kind of shiny effect if we need that in the end. So we want to make sure our format is JPG right here. We can just simply export it to the desktop, which is fine. We'll go ahead and export that and close that down. And let's go back to iClone here. Now keep in mind the more complex geometry that we saw earlier where you use vector displacement maps, those maps are actually baked from programs like ZBrush or Mudbox. You actually bake those vector displacement maps. They're pretty difficult to create by yourself. Like I showed you before with the height displacement map, you can just create that simply in Photoshop. Vector displacement maps, on the other hand, those are baked from more complex geometry within programs like I mentioned, like ZBrush or Mudbox. And in this example here, I'm just using a very quick, very simple example using Bitmap to Material to show you height displacement and how it can kind of create a cool effect using simple geometry and a simple image. So let's take a look first of all at why I added these two cubes in separately. Let's go ahead and apply a displacement map first of all to our tessellation prop right here. So we'll go to displacement map right here, and on our desktop we'll just find our height map right here. You can see Bitmap to Material kind of labels them all nicely in an organized fashion. So let's go ahead and select this height displacement map here, load that in. Now it'll give you an option here to import as a grayscale map, which I'm going to do. It's not a vector displacement map. And it'll also give the option to auto-assign this to the bump map channel, which I don't want to do in this case because we have our separate normal map. Now, if I chose to assign this to the bump map channel, it would assign it as a monochromatic image, which wouldn't be as detailed as a normal map I created in Bitmap to Material. So if I wanted to have, I could also use this option, but because I have that normal map, that RGB normal map, it's more detailed to use that one that I already have. So for now, I'm going to deselect this option and just go ahead and import this in as a height map. So let's take a look at what happens here when I do that. You can see a little bit of raised geometry right there, and we're going to get to that in just a moment. If I want to, I can increase the strength on this displacement map right here, and we can extrude that even further like that. We can go down here to the tessellation levels and increase that tessellation level to get more detail. You can multiply it out like that. And because it's a grayscale displacement map, we have that grayscale base value, which we won't mess around with right now. But I think we can just leave it right there. And you can see already that we've extruded that surface quite nicely. We can't see the details right now, but we'll get to that in just a moment. First of all, I want to show you why this one won't work, why this prop here, this cube, won't work when you do that. So I'm going to select this one. We're going to go to Materials and do the same thing. Load in that same diffuse map right here. whoops, sorry, load in the same height map right here, and go ahead. We don't need to assign as a bump map channel. Press OK, and take a look at this one. What happens when I increase or decrease the strength? We get kind of a weird effect. It seems like the cube is just kind of folding in half. And that's because the geometry of these two cubes are quite different. If I press Ctrl R on this one, and I press Ctrl R on this one, notice they have extremely different geometry. This one's much more detailed. If I press Ctrl R again, Ctrl R again. This one over here, even if I add more tessellation level to it, if I increase the tessellation level to like 10, and I multiply it, we still won't get a very accurate result on our shape. It'll kind of just look a little bit strange. If I press Ctrl R, you can see it's adding more geometry, but it's just really not enough to create any sort of acceptable detail for our prop. So we're going to go ahead and just delete this one right here. We don't need it anymore. And we're going to concentrate on this little box over here, the little box that could. And let's go ahead and take a look at how we can improve this even further. So let's go to the, select the model here and go to Materials. And we're going to go up here and we're going to actually add in that normal map. So this is going to be a good example of how the normal map adds that surface detail. So let's go to the bump map channel, double click it, and add in that normal map right here. And now we're not going to add it in as a grayscale map because we have a normal map, an RGB value one, and press OK. And you can see right away it adds that nice curvature to the outer edge of the line. For example, right along here along the mouth we get that nice curvature, and that's not actually modifying the mesh, that's just modifying how the light hits the material. So we can of course go into the displacement again and increase or decrease that strength, and you can see the different result that we have right there. So using those two in combination is a really cool way that you can create, cool little effects like this. And to emphasize this even further, we can add a specular map as well. Actually, first let's add in a blend map. So let's go to blend here. Let's add in some simple blend map. I think this one here should do just fine. And there's different blend modes. This one obviously is a little bit strange. We can go from multiply to addition. And this one is kind of cool because it looks like we have this metal embossed lion on top of a kind of painted wall. You can also go to overlay, which this one wouldn't really work that well in this case. So let's go ahead and just leave that addition. We can increase or decrease that strength as well of the blend. I like to keep it, fairly high. That should be just fine right there. And then let's go and add in that specular as well. So I'm going to press the / key to change our lighting to somewhere about here. And you can see it's really kind of has a cool effect on the shadows on the line right there. Let's go to Materials, Specular, and we'll just add in that specular for just a slight additional effect. You can see right away we don't have much of an effect because we need to go down to our specular values down here, increase that, and we can get that nice emphasis on certain highlights of the lion's head right here, and use that in combination with the glossiness to create certain effects right there. So that's pretty cool. Let's go ahead and try and tweak those tessellation levels here. Maybe take a side view. I think something like that should do. And we can increase the multiplier a little bit, I think. There you go, kind of bring it out a slight bit like that. Tessellation level, we want to probably keep that pretty high, I think, so we can get more detail right there. And that looks pretty cool. Now there's one final thing that we need to do to kind of put the finishing touch on this. The first one is that we need to enable tessellation shadows. Now this entire structure right here, this entire line is actually created from tessellation. So I need to press Control P, go into my preferences, and you can see down here we have an option called Tessellation Shadow right there. And what I want to do is select this. So when I select that, you can see that suddenly our entire image changes quite a bit here. If I press the / key, you can see now we have some shadows that are created on our geometry. So without this tessellation shadow, there's actually no shadows. Like you wouldn't see these shadows down here in our geometry, which would be kind of a pity. Although that keep in mind that tessellation shadows do take up a lot of resources. Obviously, depending on your scene and stuff like that, we're just using a simple geometric shape right here. But keep in mind that tessellation shadow will often take up additional resources. So if you're finding that your scene is lagging behind, that's one of the options to change that off depending on what you're looking for there. So that's kind of cool. Maybe one final thing, we'll just go ahead to the visual tab right here. Let's add in ourselves HDR effect. So we'll go to HDR effect, and it's kind of the bloom scale is a little bit too high for me. We can I just want to change this a little bit. We can maybe go to create a sort of a vertical flare in the glare type here and scale that up a bit. Let's go for a J.J. Abrams type kind of effect right here. Now if we just take this light and we go from one end to the other, we get that nice flare. Well, that's maybe a bit too extreme. Let's go ahead and bring that brightness threshold a little bit up. There we go. And that one's not enough. There we go. I think that's okay. So we can have this nice cool effect right there. Alright, so yeah, this is all created exactly from a simple image and a simple cube geometric shape. Alright, once you have all that set up, you can mess around with the materials a little bit. As you can see here, the diffuse map is basically just monochromatic, has two separate white and black colors. If we change this to something else, we can kind of get a nice material. But first of all, let's go over to our actual materials here. You can go to your media tab, and if you go to materials, we can add a material, or we can even add a substance material here. Take a look at what happens if I add this material. Let's maybe add this, this ground one right here onto our object right here. You can see if we do that, all the material maps are replaced except for the blend map, which is not what we want because we can't do any displacement after that. So let's just press Control Z and undo that. What we need to do is replace these individual maps at the same time. We don't want to replace the displacement or the bump maps, or the specular map for that matter. But we can mess around with the blend map and the diffuse map. For example, if I took this diffuse and I double-clicked it, went into my textures folder here, we can use something like plaster right here, this dirty plaster. We can just load that on there, and you can see the result right there. And if we rotate our light around, we can get a nice plaster sheen right there. And if we move over to the side here, you can see the extrusion as well on each side of the cube right here. We get that nice specular reflective result as well. We can even just take the material and get rid of the bump map, or the blend map rather, and we have a more clean plaster result like that. And we can then even just go and replace the diffuse. Let's maybe try and have an ice sculpture of some sort. That's kind of a cool effect. If we take this this ice texture right here, when you apply that, you can see we got that nice shiny looking ice texture right there. Let's maybe move it over on this side here. You can see the nice HDR reflection, or the flare that we got there. We can maybe increase that flare for this example, but that's kind of the result. And you can just mess around with the blend maps, mess around with all the other maps. Just keep the if you want this extrusion result to remain, you'll want to keep the displacement map and the normal map in place, as well as the specular map for those nice shiny edges there along the corners. So that's about it for this tutorial. We just kind of reviewed the differences between height displacement, vector displacement, and normal maps, and how you can use those in combination with each other to get great looking results like this. So that's about it for this tutorial. Thanks for watching, guys, and hopefully you learned something about how to use these maps together to create cool effects like this.